Day 109 of the NHL lockout, but do we have room for optimism? Well, the commissioner has outlined details on what could be a salvage season, but is that likely? For the latest, let's welcome in Darren Dreger of TSN. Darren, let's start right off the bat. Just kind of a general. What is the latest? What is the mood? Is it more optimism or pessimism at this point in time?
You know, it depends who you ask. When the day began, the view from the National Hockey League sources within was that it was looking optimistic, that they were closing the gap, and I wouldn't say a deal was imminent, but it was certainly inching towards that point. Yet, conversely, you ask some of the militant, the Hardline Players Association representatives, and they would say, hey, that optimism is a tad unfounded at this stage. There's still a number of issues. The players' pension is right near the top of the list. And, of course, you've got the issue of the disclaimer of interest with a midnight Eastern deadline tonight looming, and whether or not the Players Association are going to file that. So there's still some unresolved issues between these two sides.
Yes, you've definitely been on that story, today being the deadline, January 2nd. Prior to Christmas, they had voted to allow potentially to essentially dissolve the association, the union, and allow players to file individual antitrust lawsuits. What do you think is likely to happen before midnight tonight?
You know, that's a difficult question to answer because there's been all sorts of information flowing. How much of it is on point? Again, it depends on who you believe. There are certain players who feel strongly that the Players Association should not give up its leverage and should file that disclaimer of interest. But let me tell you this, in dealing with NHL owner sources as well, if the players file that disclaimer of interest, things likely will turn messy. This negotiation has been reasonably amicable over the course of this week. There has been considerable progress made, but if the disclaimer of interest is filed, that absolutely changes the dynamic of this negotiation in its 11th hour and may put the owners in a position where they find it difficult to salvage what could be the remainder of a season.
All right, Gary Bettman, speaking of remainder of a season, said January 11th, that's when we need an agreement in place. We could start playing the 19th and allow for a 48-game season. If the 11th comes and goes, does that mean there will be no hockey this year?
Certainly sounds that way, and I think it would be a dangerous game played by the Players Association if they want to test that deadline, because you look back at the history of the National Hockey League and all that goes into a Stanley Cup playoff push and how entertaining that is. Well, one thing's certain, according to the NHL, is they do not want to be playing the playoffs late in June and into early July. So when they look at the viability of what would be a meaningful regular season, they don't want it to be less than 48 games. Best case scenario, there could be a resolution, a new CBA in place by the weekend. That's best case scenario, and maybe conceivably you play 50 or more regular season games. But if you get below 48 games, then that's not something that the owners of the National Hockey League are willing to live by. So they look at January 11th as being hard and fast and a true deadline to get the game back on track for the 19th.
That's Darren Dreger reporting from New York from TSN. Thank you very much for the time and for the information, Darren.
Thank you.